This is how a millionaire stops when a girl hands him a paper that says, "You saved my mum." Imagine you're rushing to $1 million meeting. You're one of the most powerful businessmen in the city, your time worth more than most people's annual salary. And suddenly, a 10-year-old girl blocks your path on the sidewalk. She's not asking for money. She's not selling anything. She simply pulls out a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket and holds it out to you with a determination that stops you cold. When you open that paper, when you read those 5 words written in purple crayon, your entire world collapses. You saved my mom, but here's the problem. You have absolutely no idea what this means. You don't remember saving anyone. You're a cold, calculating businessman, someone who measures people's worth by the zeros in their bank accounts. How can you have saved someone's life and not remember? This is the true story of Marcus Wellington, a millionaire who discovered that a simple act of kindness lasting 5 minutes 8 years ago had consequences he never imagined. A story that will make you question, how many lives have you touched without knowing? Because sometimes the most important decisions we make in life are the ones we don't even realize we're making. Stay until the end, because this story will completely change how you see the impact of your actions on the world. The November morning in downtown Chicago was unforgiving. Gray clouds hung low over the towering glass buildings of the Loop, casting long shadows across the bustling streets. The wind whipped through the urban canyon with a bite that cut through even the most expensive coats, carrying with it the mingled scents of coffee from nearby cafes, fresh bagels from street vendors, and the acrid exhaust fumes of countless vehicles navigating the morning rush hour. Marcus Wellington stepped out of his pristine black Tesla Model S, the soft thud of the closing door barely audible above the symphony of city sounds. At 42, he was the living embodiment of American success, a man whose very presence commanded attention and respect. His jawline was sharp and decisive, complementing steel gray eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything they saw. Those eyes had negotiated billion-dollar deals and stared down some of Chicago's most powerful business leaders without flinching. His custom-tailored Italian suit, worth more than many people's monthly salary, fit his athletic frame perfectly. The charcoal wool had been hand-selected from a mill in Milan, sewn by craftsmen whose families had been making suits for 3 generations. Even his shoes, handmade Oxfords from London, spoke of wealth earned through relentless ambition and calculated risks that had transformed him from a struggling insurance adjuster into one of Chicago's most influential real estate moguls. Mr. Wellington, your meeting with the Henderson Group is scheduled for 9:30. His assistant, Patricia, reminded him through his wireless earpiece, her voice crisp and professional. She had worked for him for 6 years, long enough to know that his schedule was sacred, that every minute was accounted for and optimized for maximum productivity. "Move it to 10, Marcus replied curtly, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "I want to review the Patterson acquisition files one more time. The numbers on the Southside development need another look. The sidewalk was a river of humanity, commuters flowing with the purposeful urgency that defined city life. Men and women in business attire hurried past, their faces buried in smartphones or hidden behind steaming coffee cups. Students with backpacks weaved between slower-moving pedestrians, earbuds blocking out the world around them. Marcus had learned long ago to navigate through these crowds without really seeing the people. They were obstacles to maneuver around, not individuals worthy of his attention or consideration. As he approached the revolving glass doors of the 40-story Wellington Financial Tower, his empire's crown jewel with his name etched in gold letters across the marble entrance, something unprecedented happened. A small figure stepped directly into his path, causing him to stop so abruptly that a businessman behind him nearly collided with his back. Marcus looked down, his usual irritation at being delayed quickly replaced by surprise. Before him stood a girl, no more than 10 years old, with sandy brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, secured with an elastic band that had seen better days. Her clothes were clean and well-maintained, but clearly from a discount store. A purple jacket that had been carefully mended at one elbow, and jeans with small patches at the knees. The kind of repairs that spoke of a family that took care of what they had because they couldn't easily replace it. But what truly struck Marcus, what made him pause instead of simply stepping around her, were her eyes. They were deep brown, intelligent beyond her years, and held a gravity that seemed impossibly mature for someone so young. There was no fear in those eyes, no uncertainty or shyness that he would have expected from a child approaching a stranger. Instead, there was something that looked like recognition, purpose. She wasn't holding out her hand for money like the occasional panhandlers he encountered near his building. She wasn't trying to sell him something or ask for directions. She simply stood there, looking up at him with an expression that seemed to pierce straight through his carefully constructed facade of success and authority. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his tone carrying the polite but dismissive inflection he had perfected for dealing with anyone who wasn't directly relevant to his business interests. He moved to step around her, already mentally returning to thoughts of profit margins and acquisition strategies, but she shifted slightly, maintaining her position in his path with the quiet determination of someone who had traveled a long way to be in this exact spot at this exact moment. The girl reached into her jacket pocket, a movement so deliberate and careful that Marcus found himself watching despite his impatience. She pulled out a piece of paper, folded several times into a small square. The edges were worn from handling, soft like fabric, as if it had been carried for a very long time, taken out and refolded countless times. Without saying a word, she extended it toward him, her small hand steady and sure. Marcus glanced around, suddenly hyper-aware of the stream of people walking past them. Commuters flowed around their small island of stillness like water around a stone, absorbed in their own concerns and destinations, cell phones and morning routines, preventing them from noticing this odd interaction between a powerful businessman and a determined child. "What is this?" he asked, his voice softer now, something in her demeanor preventing him from using his usual dismissive tone. There was an intensity about her silence that was more compelling than any words could have been. She didn't answer immediately, just continued to hold out the paper with a patience that seemed infinite. Her brown eyes never left his face, as if she was studying him, measuring him against some internal standard that only she understood, against his better judgment and every instinct honed by years of avoiding distractions and maintaining focus on what mattered to his bottom line. Marcus reached out and took the paper. It felt fragile between his fingers, worn soft from repeated handling. He began to unfold it carefully, aware that this simple action was somehow significant in a way he couldn't yet understand. The paper revealed a child's careful handwriting, each letter formed with the deliberate precision of someone who had taken time to make every word clear and readable. The writing implement had been a purple crayon, the waxy lines slightly uneven, but unmistakably earnest. And there, in that careful script, were 5 simple words that hit Marcus like a physical blow. "You saved my mom." Marcus stared at the words, reading them once, twice, 3 times, as if repetition might make them make sense or reveal some hidden meaning he was missing. The sounds of the city, car horns honking in frustration at morning traffic, snippets of conversation from passing pedestrians, the distant rumble of the elevated train carrying commuters to their various destinations, seemed to fade into a muffled background hum. His mind, trained to process complex financial data and retain every detail of important business negotiations, went completely blank. He prided himself on his memory, on his ability to recall every deal, every contract, every person who had ever been useful to his business or posed a threat to his interests. Client names, phone numbers, the details of negotiations from years past. All of it was catalogued and accessible in his mental database. But as he looked at this child, searching desperately through his memories for any connection, any context that would make these 5 words make sense, he found only emptiness. "I don't understand," he said, looking up from the paper to meet those serious brown eyes. His voice carried a note of vulnerability that his business associates had never heard. "What does this mean? Who is your mother?" I don't remember." For the first time since approaching him, the girl spoke. Her voice was quiet but clear, with the kind of directness that only children possess, unfiltered by the social complexities and strategic considerations that governed adult communication. "You don't remember her, do you?" The question hit him like a revelation, and an accusation rolled into one. Marcus Wellington, a man who remembered the birthday of every major client, who could recite profit projections from memory, who never forgot a face or a name that might prove useful to his business empire, had apparently saved someone's life and retained no memory of it whatsoever. "I remember everything important," he said, more to himself than to her, his voice carrying a note of desperate confusion. "Every business deal, every transaction, every acquisition, every contract negotiation." Maybe it wasn't business. The girl said simply, her words carrying a wisdom that seemed impossible from someone so young. The November wind picked up suddenly, sending a small whirlwind of dead leaves skittering across the sidewalk between them. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees, but neither Marcus nor the girl moved to seek shelter. Marcus realized with growing amazement that he had been standing there for several minutes, something that never happened. His time was measured. In millions of dollars, every minute of his day accounted for and optimized for maximum productivity. He had meetings that decided the fate of multi-million-dollar projects, phone calls that could make or break deals that employed hundreds of people. Yet here he stood, completely captivated by a child and a piece of paper with 5 words written in purple crayon. "What's your name?" he asked, crouching down to her level, his expensive suit forgotten as his knees touched the cold sidewalk. "Emma," she replied, her eyes never leaving his face. "Emma Rodriguez." Rodriguez. The name triggered something in the depths of his mind, a faint echo of memory that felt like trying to remember a dream from years past. It was frustrating and elusive. The harder he concentrated on capturing it, the more it seemed to slip away from his grasp. "And your mother, Maria Rodriguez." Emma's gaze remained steady and unwavering, as if she was studying his reaction, waiting for the moment when recognition would dawn and understanding would replace confusion. "Maria Rodriguez." Marcus repeated the name silently, rolling it around in his mind like a key that should fit a lock he couldn't quite locate. The name felt familiar, but in the way that a half-remembered song might. You know you've heard it before, but you can't place where or when or what it means. How could he have saved someone's life and not remember? It seemed not just impossible, but incomprehensible. He was a man who built his success on attention to detail, on remembering every advantage and every obligation. Yet the conviction in this child's eyes was absolute, unshakable. She knew something about him that he had forgotten about himself. "Emma," he said, still crouching so they were at eye level, "I need you to help me understand. When did this happen? How did I save your mother? I want to remember, but I need you to help me." Before she could answer, Patricia's voice crackled through his earpiece with mechanical urgency. "Mr. Wellington, the Henderson Group has arrived early. They're in the lobby asking if you can meet now instead of waiting until 10. They seem quite eager to move forward with the Southside project." The real world came crashing back like cold water. Marcus straightened abruptly, suddenly aware of where he was and what he was supposed to be doing. 40 floors above them, some of Chicago's most influential developers were waiting for him. They had a multi-million-dollar deal on the table, a project that would shape the skyline and generate enormous profits. People were depending on him, investors, employees, contractors who would benefit from the construction jobs. This was his life. Calculated decisions, strategic moves, meetings that mattered, not standing on a sidewalk trying to solve riddles from children. But as he looked down at Emma, still waiting patiently for his attention with that same infinite patience she had shown from the beginning, he realized something fundamental had shifted inside him. The paper in his hand felt heavier than any contract he had ever signed, more significant than any deal he had ever negotiated. "I have to go," he said, though the words felt wrong as he spoke them, as if he was betraying something important. "But Emma, I want to understand. I need to understand. Can you meet me here again, tomorrow, same time?" Emma nodded solemnly, as if this request was exactly what she had been expecting. "She said you'd want to know the whole story." "She told you to find me?" "She told me a lot of things about you," Emma said, her voice carrying a mysterious weight, "things that might surprise you." With that cryptic statement hanging in the air between them, she turned and began walking away. Her small figure moved, with purpose through the crowd of morning commuters, quickly disappearing among the forest of legs and briefcases and winter coats. Marcus stood there watching until he couldn't see her anymore, the crumpled paper still clutched in his hand like a lifeline to something he couldn't yet understand. As he finally walked through the revolving doors into his building, past the marble lobby with his name etched in gold letters, past the security guards who nodded respectfully, past the elevator banks that would carry him to his empire 40 floors above the street, Marcus Wellington couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully ordered world had just been turned upside down by 5 words written in purple crayon. The elevator ride to the 40th floor gave him precious minutes to compose himself, to push the encounter into the back of his mind where it belonged. He had work to do, money to make, an empire to run. The Henderson Group was waiting, along with their multi-million-dollar development project. He straightened his tie, checked his reflection in the polished steel of the elevator doors, and prepared to become the Marcus Wellington that everyone expected. Confident, focused, untouchable. But even as he transformed back into the successful businessman that the world knew, even as he prepared to discuss profit margins and construction timelines and zoning permits, he couldn't stop thinking about the weight of conviction in a 10-year-old girl's eyes. What had he done that he couldn't remember? And why did the answer suddenly feel like the most important thing in the world? The Henderson Group meeting stretched on interminably, each minute feeling like an hour to Marcus, as his mind wandered far from the polished conference room. The space itself was a testament to corporate success, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Lake Michigan, a mahogany table that could seat 20 people, and original artwork whose value exceeded most people's annual salaries adorning the walls. Thomas Henderson, a portly man in his 60s with perfectly styled silver hair and a Rolex that caught the light every time he gestured, dominated the conversation with his booming voice. He had built his reputation on aggressive development projects that transformed neighborhoods, often displacing longtime residents in favor of luxury condominiums and upscale retail spaces. The South Side development has enormous potential, Henderson was saying, his thick fingers pointing at architectural renderings spread across the table. We're talking about a complete transformation of the area. Luxury apartments, high-end shopping, gourmet restaurants. The property values alone will triple within 5 years. South Side. The words triggered something deep in Marcus's memory, a flash so brief and incomplete it was gone before he could grasp it. Images flickered through his mind like frames from an old film. Row houses with peeling paint that spoke of decades of harsh Chicago winters. Narrow streets lined with cars that had seen better days. The rich smell of cooking rice and beans drifting from open windows where families shared meals around small tables. The key is moving quickly before property values increase too much. Henderson continued, unaware of Marcus's distraction. We can acquire the entire block for a fraction of what it'll be worth after development. Of course, we'll need to relocate some of the current residents, but that's standard for urban renewal projects. Marcus blinked, trying to focus on the conversation. Around the table, other developers nodded enthusiastically, seeing dollar signs where Marcus was suddenly seeing faces, the faces of families who would be displaced by their ambitions. Mr. Wellington, Henderson's voice cut through his reverie like a blade. What are your thoughts on the timeline? We're hoping to break ground by spring. Marcus looked around the table, seeing expectant faces waiting for his input. These men respected his judgment, valued his opinion because his track record spoke for itself. Every project he had backed had been profitable. Every investment had exceeded expectations. I'll need to review the projections more carefully, he said smoothly, falling back on the kind of non-committal response that had served him well in countless meetings. Let's schedule a follow-up for next week. There were murmurs of agreement around the table, though Marcus caught a flicker of surprise in Henderson's eyes. Normally, Marcus was decisive, ready to commit or pass judgment quickly. Delays and extended deliberation weren't his style. After the meeting finally concluded, Marcus retreated to his office, a sprawling space that occupied a corner of the building's top floor. The room was a monument to his success. Modern furniture selected by an expensive interior designer, awards and recognition plaques lining one wall, and windows on two sides offering commanding views of the city he had helped reshape through his investments. He closed the door and pulled out the paper Emma had given him, smoothing it carefully on his mahogany desk. The purple crayon letters seemed to glow under his desk lamp. You saved my mom. The words stared back at him with stubborn persistence, refusing to yield their secrets. He picked up his phone and dialed his assistant. Patricia, I need you to search our company records. Look for any Maria Rodriguez, any dealings we might have had with someone by that name. What time frame should I focus on, Mr. Wellington? That was the problem. He had no idea when this interaction might have taken place. Start with the last 5 years, then expand if necessary. Check insurance claims, property transactions, employment records, anything that might show a connection. While he waited for the search results, Marcus walked to the window, looking down at the street where he had encountered Emma just hours earlier. The sidewalk was still busy with foot traffic, a constant stream of people going about their daily lives. But now it looked different to him somehow. Instead of seeing faceless obstacles to navigate around, he found himself wondering about the stories behind each hurried figure. How many of them had problems they were trying to solve? How many were struggling with situations that seemed impossible? How many had he helped without knowing it? How many had slipped through his memory like water through his fingers? His computer chimed with an incoming email from Patricia. He opened it eagerly, hoping for answers, but found only disappointment. The search had yielded nothing. No contracts, no business dealings, no insurance claims, no property transactions involving anyone named Maria Rodriguez. According to his company's comprehensive records, she didn't exist in his professional world, but that didn't mean she didn't exist at all. Marcus spent the rest of the afternoon attempting to focus on work, but his concentration was completely shattered. Every phone call felt meaningless. Every document seemed trivial compared to the mystery that had taken root in his mind. He found himself staring out the window, lost in thought, while important emails went unanswered and urgent matters were pushed aside By 5 o'clock, he had made a decision that would have shocked anyone who knew him. He was going to leave the office early, something he hadn't done in years unless he was traveling for business or attending a crucial evening meeting. The drive to his penthouse apartment in Lincoln Park usually provided valuable transition time, a chance to decompress from the high-stakes world of business and prepare for whatever personal obligations awaited him. But as his Tesla navigated the evening traffic, Marcus found himself taking an unplanned detour. Almost without conscious thought, he drove south, away from the gleaming towers of downtown and the manicured neighborhoods where he usually spent his time. The streets gradually changed character, becoming narrower and more intimate. The buildings grew older, many showing signs of age and economic struggle, but also signs of pride and community investment. This was a part of Chicago he rarely saw, a world that existed parallel to his own, but seldom intersected with it. Here, children played on front stoops despite the November chill, their laughter echoing off brick walls and creating a symphony of life that was markedly different from the sterile quiet of his usual environment. He parked on a street lined with small houses, many of them showing the kind of wear that comes with decades of Chicago winters, but also the care that comes from families who take pride in what they have. Some houses had small front gardens, now dormant for winter but clearly tended with love during the growing season. Others featured creative decorations, wind chimes made from recycled materials, colorful murals painted on garage doors, small details that spoke of people making the best of what they had. The smell of cooking food drifted from various windows, spices and scents that were completely foreign to his usual diet of expensive restaurant meals and catered business lunches. Somewhere, someone was cooking rice and beans. From another direction came the aroma of fresh tortillas. The air was alive with the sense of home cooking, of families sharing meals together. Marcus sat in his car, feeling simultaneously out of place and strangely drawn to the scene before him. Something about this neighborhood tugged at his memory, creating an emotional resonance that he couldn't explain. It was like looking at a photograph from his past, but one that had been taken when he wasn't paying attention. A woman emerged from one of the houses, calling to her children in rapid Spanish. She appeared to be about 40 years old, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a winter coat that had been carefully maintained, but showed signs of several seasons' use. For a heart-stopping moment, Marcus wondered if this could be Maria Rodriguez. But as she drew closer, herding her children inside, with the gentle authority of a mother who had repeated this routine countless times, he realized he felt no recognition at all. If he had met her before, if he had helped her in some significant way, surely there would be some spark of memory, some emotional response. Frustrated and feeling increasingly foolish, Marcus drove home to his penthouse. The contrast was jarring, transitioning from the modest neighborhood with its lived-in warmth and community spirit to his sterile apartment with its minimalist furniture, designer fixtures, and spectacular but lonely views. He poured himself a glass of 25-year-old scotch and stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness. The view was worth millions. Lake Michigan stretching to the horizon, the iconic Chicago skyline, the geometric patterns of streets and neighborhoods spreading in all directions. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened glass, and for the first time in years, Marcus really looked at himself. When did he become this person? When had his world shrunk to consist only of deals and profits and the next acquisition? He tried to remember the last time he had done something purely out of kindness, without calculating the potential return on investment or strategic advantage. The memory came slowly, reluctantly, like a photograph developing in a dark room. The image becoming clearer bit by bit. He was younger, maybe 35, still hungry for success but not yet hardened by the weight of enormous wealth and power. It was winter, he remembered now, snowing hard enough to make driving treacherous. He had been driving home late from a client meeting, back when he still took evening appointments and worked directly with individual customers rather than dealing only with major corporate accounts. The insurance company he worked for then handled middle and lower income clients, people who couldn't afford the premium policies that his current company specialized in. It was honest work, helping families protect themselves against catastrophic loss, but it paid modestly and offered limited opportunities for advancement. There had been an accident that night, not a major collision, but significant enough to block traffic and create a backup that stretched for blocks. While other drivers honked their horns and complained about the delay, Marcus had gotten out of his car to see if he could help direct traffic or provide assistance to anyone who might be injured. That's when he saw her, a woman standing beside a badly damaged Honda Civic, holding a crying baby while trying to simultaneously calm two other small children and deal with the chaos around her. She was speaking rapidly in Spanish, clearly overwhelmed and scared, trying to communicate with the police officer who was taking the accident report. The memory was becoming clearer now, details emerging like fragments of a broken mirror, slowly reassembling themselves. The woman was Maria Rodriguez. The damaged car was hers, but she was dealing with a nightmare scenario. She was uninsured. Marcus remembered that detail vividly now because it had complicated everything. The accident hadn't been her fault. That much was clear from the physical evidence and witness statements. But without insurance of her own, she had no protection against the other driver's insurance company, which was already making demands for damages to their client's vehicle. The scene came back to him with startling clarity. Maria Rodriguez standing in the falling snow, holding her infant daughter while trying to keep her two other children calm and warm, facing the possibility of financial ruin over an accident that wasn't even her fault. Marcus remembered feeling something he rarely experienced in his professional life: genuine, uncomplicated empathy. This wasn't a client or a potential business partner or someone who might prove useful to his career advancement. This was simply a person in crisis, a mother trying to protect her children while facing a situation that seemed impossible to navigate. What had he done? The exact details were still hazy, lost in the fog of 8 years and countless other interactions. But Marcus remembered staying late at the office that night, making phone calls, pulling strings, leveraging his growing network in the insurance industry. He had found a way to help her, not through official channels that might have taken months to resolve, but through personal connections and his own expanding influence in the business community. He remembered vouching for her character to people he knew, making calls to contacts who owed him favors, essentially using his professional reputation to solve her problem. The baby. One of the children Maria had been holding that snowy night had been an infant, maybe 6 months old, bundled in blankets against the cold. The other children were older, a boy who might have been around 2, and a girl who was perhaps 4 or 5. But there had definitely been a baby. If that baby was now 10 years old, Marcus set down his scotch glass with hands that weren't entirely steady. Emma. Emma was that baby, now grown into the serious, intelligent child who had sought him out with her mother's message. But why now? What had prompted Maria Rodriguez to send her daughter to find him after all these years? And what did "you saved my mom" really mean? He had helped her with insurance issues, certainly, but that hardly constituted saving someone's life. Unless there was more to the story. Unless his intervention had consequences he had never imagined, ripple effects that extended far beyond that one snowy night 8 years ago. Marcus spent the rest of the evening trying to piece together more memories, but they remained frustratingly incomplete. He could remember the immediate crisis, the accident, Maria's fear. his decision to help, but the details of what happened afterward were lost to time and the relentless pace of his climbing career. By the time he went to bed, Marcus had made a decision that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. Tomorrow, he will meet Emma again, and this time, he would get the whole story no matter what meetings he had to cancel or deals he had to postpone. For the first time in years, something mattered more than business. As he lay in his king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling while the city hummed quietly beyond his windows, Marcus Wellington realized that a 10-year-old girl with a piece of paper had accomplished something that billion-dollar deals and international recognition had never managed. She had made him remember that he was human. Marcus arrived at their meeting spot 20 minutes early, something he never did for business appointments, where timing was calculated to the minute for maximum psychological advantage. The November morning was even more brutal than the day before, with a sharp wind that seemed to cut through even his expensive wool coat and find every gap in his clothing. He stood near the entrance to his building, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air, watching the familiar flow of morning commuters with new eyes. Each face that passed by now seemed to carry a story he hadn't bothered to notice before. The woman was hurrying past in a coat that had seen several winters, probably heading to a job that barely paid enough to cover rent and groceries. The young man with paint stains on his jacket, clearly a construction worker or tradesman starting his day before dawn. The elderly gentleman moved slowly with a walker, taking twice as long as everyone else, but still determined to maintain his independence. When had he stopped seeing people as individuals and started seeing them only as obstacles or opportunities? Emma appeared at exactly the same time as the previous day, as if she had been carefully timing her arrival. Today, she wore a different jacket, this one green and slightly too large, probably a hand-me-down from an older sibling or a thrift store. Fine, that would need to last several seasons. But her eyes held the same serious intelligence, the same sense of purpose that had stopped him in his tracks 24 hours earlier. "You came back," she said simply, walking up to him with the confident stride of someone much older than her. 10 years. "I remembered some things," Marcus replied, surprised by the relief he felt at seeing her again. "About that night, about the accident. Your mother was there with 3 children, including a baby. You were the baby, weren't you?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Mum said you'd remember eventually. She said you were the kind of person who doesn't forget people, even when you think you do." The observation stung, because it highlighted exactly how far he had strayed from whoever he used to be. Once upon a time, he had been someone who noticed people, who cared about their stories. Now he was someone who scheduled his compassion between board meetings. "Emma, I need to understand what happened after that night. I helped your mother with insurance issues, but how did that save her life?" Instead of answering immediately, Emma looked around at the busy street scene. Commuters rushing past, car horns honking in the distance, the general atmosphere of urban urgency that never seemed to pause. "Can we walk?" she asked. "Mom always says important conversations shouldn't happen where everyone's rushing around. She says you can't really listen when you're surrounded by people who are thinking about being somewhere else." Marcus glanced. At his Rolex, he had a conference call scheduled in 45 minutes with investors from Tokyo, a crucial discussion about expanding his operations into the Asian markets. The call represented millions of dollars in potential investment and months of careful relationship building. Then he looked at Emma's expectant face, at the patient way she waited for his decision without pressuring him or pleading for his attention. "Lead the way," he said, making a choice that would have shocked his business partners. They walked south, away from the gleaming towers of the Loop, toward the neighborhoods Marcus had driven through the evening before. Emma moved with the confidence of someone who knew these streets intimately. navigating crosswalks and side streets with the kind of easy familiarity that comes from years of walking the same routes. After the accident, Emma began as they walked, her voice clear despite the city noise around them. Mum was terrified. The other driver's insurance company was saying she had to pay for damages to his car, even though the police report said it wasn't her fault. She didn't have insurance of her own, and she was afraid they'd take our house or that she'd go to jail and we'd be put in foster care. Marcus remembered that fear vividly now. The way Maria had clutched her children while trying to make phone calls she couldn't afford to lawyers who wouldn't take her case. The desperation in her voice as she tried to explain her situation to people who seemed determined not to understand. She worked 3 jobs then, Emma continued, her matter-of-fact tone somehow making the information more powerful than if she had delivered it with drama or emotion. Cleaning offices at night from 11 p.m. to 6 in the morning, serving lunch at Murphy's Diner from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., and taking care of Mrs. Patterson's kids after school until their parents got home from work. She basically never slept more than 3 or 4 hours at a time, and she was always worried about money. The image painted by Emma's words was heartbreaking, a single mother working herself to exhaustion while constantly afraid that one wrong move, one unexpected expense, would destroy the precarious stability she had built for her children. Mrs. Patterson, Marcus repeated, the name striking him like lightning. He had heard it just yesterday in his meeting with Henderson, mentioned in passing as part of their development discussions. But 8 years ago, it had been part of the solution he had crafted for Maria Rodriguez. You helped her get a full-time job with Mrs. Patterson, Emma said, noticing his reaction. But it was more than that. You made sure the insurance company covered everything from the accident, even though they said they didn't have to because Mum didn't have her own policy. And when Mum got sick, she stopped walking abruptly, and they found themselves standing in front of a small community clinic, wedged between a grocery store and a laundromat. The building was old but well maintained, with a sign in both English and Spanish, advertising low-cost medical care, sliding scale fees, and evening hours for working families. This is where it happened, Emma said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that seemed far too heavy for someone her age. Where did that happen? Where Mom almost died? The words hung in the cold air between them like a physical presence. Marcus felt something cold and heavy settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the November weather. He looked at the clinic's modest entrance, at the people going in and out, families with children, elderly individuals moving slowly, working people who probably couldn't afford private doctors or specialists. Emma sat down on a bench outside the clinic, and Marcus joined her, suddenly needing to sit down as the full implications of her words began to sink in. Around them, life continued its normal rhythm, people going about their daily business, unaware that they were witnessing a conversation that would change everything for one of them. It was about 6 months after the accident, Emma began, her voice taking on the careful cadence of someone recounting a story she had heard many times, each detail preserved with the precision that comes from understanding its importance. Mom had been feeling sick for weeks, but she couldn't afford to go to the doctor. She kept saying it was just stress, just exhaustion from working so much. She would come home from cleaning offices all night, grab a quick shower, then rush to the diner for the lunch shift. By the time she got home from taking care of Mrs. Patterson's kids, she could barely keep her eyes open. Marcus found his hands clenching involuntarily in his lap as he listened. But it wasn't getting better. Emma continued, staring at the clinic's entrance as if she could see through time to that terrible night. She was losing weight, couldn't keep food down, had terrible pain in her side. Miguel, that's my older brother, he kept telling her she needed to see a doctor, but Mom would just say we couldn't afford it. She was already behind on bills because she'd had to take time off work right after the accident. The picture Emma was painting grew more heartbreaking with each detail. Marcus could imagine Maria Rodriguez working herself to exhaustion while ignoring clear signs that something was seriously wrong, trapped by the impossible choice between getting medical care and keeping her family financially afloat. Then one night she collapsed at the diner, Emma said, her voice becoming very quiet. Right in the middle of her shift, just fell down behind the counter. The other waitress called 911, and the ambulance brought her here. She gestured toward the clinic's entrance, where a steady stream of patients continued to flow in and out. The doctors said she had appendicitis, Emma continued, but it had been building for weeks. By the time she got here, her appendix was about to burst. They said if she had waited even another day or two. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Marcus felt his throat tighten. But she got the surgery. She got the surgery because she had insurance, Emma said, turning to look at him directly with those serious brown eyes. The insurance that came with her full-time job. The job that you helped her get when you connected her with Mrs. Patterson's family business. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that Marcus had never imagined. His intervention hadn't just solved an immediate problem with an insurance claim. It had created a chain of events that literally saved Maria Rodriguez's life. Mrs. Patterson's husband owned a small company that provided cleaning and maintenance services to office buildings around the city, Emma explained. When you vouched for Mom's character and work ethic, Mrs. Patterson offered her a full-time position with benefits. Instead of working 3 different part-time jobs with no security, Mom became a full-time employee with health insurance, paid sick days, and regular hours. Marcus was beginning to understand the full scope of what had happened. By helping Maria secure that position, he had transformed her entire life situation. She went from being a desperate single mother working multiple jobs to someone with stability, security, and most importantly, access to healthcare. If you hadn't helped her that night after the accident, Emma said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, she never would have gotten the job with health insurance. She would have kept working those 3 jobs, ignoring her symptoms, because she couldn't afford to get sick. And when her appendix finally burst, she didn't need to finish the sentence. They both understood what would have happened. Marcus sat in stunned silence, processing the enormity of what he had just learned. A simple act of kindness, one he had almost forgotten, had ripple effects that extended far beyond anything he could have imagined. By helping Maria navigate insurance issues after a car accident, he had inadvertently positioned her to receive the medical care that saved her life months later. "How old were you when this happened?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I was 2, Emma replied. "Miguel was 8 and Carmen was 6. We were staying with our neighbor, Mrs. Garcia, when Mom got rushed to the hospital. We didn't understand what was happening, just that Mom was gone and everyone looked scared." Marcus tried to imagine 3 small children, the oldest only 8 years old, waiting for news about their mother while not understanding that their entire world hung in the balance. If Maria had died that night, those children would have become orphans, probably separated into different foster homes, their lives forever altered by tragedy. Mrs. Garcia sat us down the next morning and tried to explain, Emma continued, her voice taking on the distant quality of someone accessing very early memories. She said Mom was very sick, but that the doctors were taking good care of her. I don't remember much from when I was 2, but Miguel tells me I cried for 3 days straight until Mom came home. And after the surgery, Mom recovered completely. But it took time. She had to stay in the hospital for almost a week, then she needed several weeks at home to heal properly. Emma smiled for the first time since Marcus had met her, an expression that transformed her serious face. Mrs. Patterson was amazing during that whole time. She made sure Mom could take all the time off she needed without losing pay, and when Mom came back to work, she arranged for lighter duties until she was completely healed. Emma's smile grew wider as she continued. Mrs. Patterson became like family to us. She helped Miguel get into a vocational program when he was in high school. He's an electrician now and has his own small business. She wrote recommendation letters for Carmen when she was applying to colleges. Carmen's studying to be a teacher now and wants to work with kids from families like ours. They sat quietly for several minutes, watching people go about their daily lives. Marcus was trying to process not just the story Emma had told him, but the implications of it. In his current life, he measured success in quarterly earnings and acquisition targets, in stock prices and market share. But 8 years ago, without even realizing it, he had saved a woman's life and altered the trajectory of an entire family. "Emma," he said finally, his voice still rough with emotion, "why did your mother want you to find me? Why now?" Emma reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out another piece of paper, this one folded more carefully, the edges crisp and new. She handed it to Marcus with the same solemnity she had shown when delivering the first message. This paper contained a longer message, written in an adult's careful handwriting. "Mr. Wellington, I know you probably don't remember me, but I remember you every single day. 8 years ago, you helped a stranger in crisis without asking for anything in return. That kindness saved my life in ways you never knew about and probably never imagined. I've been following your career from a distance over the years, reading about your success in the business pages of the Tribune. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, genuinely happy that someone who showed me such kindness has been rewarded with prosperity. But I've also noticed that the generous, caring man who helped me seems to have gotten lost somewhere along the way to success. Emma is sick. The doctors say she needs surgery to correct a heart defect that she was born with. It's not immediately life-threatening, but it needs to be done soon, and it needs to be done properly. The surgery is expensive, about $40,000, even after what our insurance will cover. The medical bills will be overwhelming for us, and I find myself in a position remarkably similar to the one you rescued me from 8 years ago. I want to be very clear. I'm not writing to ask you for money. I'm writing to remind you of who you used to be, and to tell you that your kindness had consequences you never imagined. Maybe knowing that will help you remember the person you were before success changed you. Maybe it will help you find your way back to him. If you would like to visit us, we live at 2847 Maple Street, but if you decide not to come, please know that I will always be grateful for the man who stopped to help a stranger on a snowy night when he could have simply driven past. With endless gratitude, Maria Rodriguez P.S. Emma insisted on delivering the first message herself. She said she wanted to see what kind of person you had become. Marcus read the letter twice, his hands trembling slightly. Emma sat beside him patiently, waiting for him to process the full weight of what he had just learned. When he looked up, she was studying his face with those remarkably intelligent eyes. "What kind of person did you think I'd become?" he asked. Emma considered the question with the same serious attention she'd given everything else in their conversation. "Mom said you'd either be someone who remembered how to care about people or someone who'd forgotten completely. She wasn't sure which one we'd find. And what do you think?" "I think," Emma said slowly, choosing her words with care, "that you're someone who forgot but wants to remember." As they sat outside the clinic where Maria Rodriguez had nearly died 8 years earlier, Marcus Wellington realized that this 10-year-old girl might understand him better than he understood himself. The weight of unexpected truth was settling over him like a heavy coat, the understanding that his actions had consequences far beyond anything he had imagined, that kindness could ripple through time in ways that defied calculation or prediction. For the first time in years, he was beginning to remember what it felt like to be fully human. The address Emma had given him led Marcus to a tree-lined street about 15 minutes from downtown, in a neighborhood that existed in the space between struggle and stability. The houses were small but well-maintained, with narrow lots and front porches that spoke of an earlier era when communities were built around relationships rather than privacy. Children's bicycles leaned against porch railings, and several houses had small gardens, now dormant for winter, but clearly tended with the kind of care that comes from knowing that every plant, every flower, represents an investment of hope in the future. Marcus had cancelled 3 important meetings to be here: a conference call with investors from London, a strategy session with his development team, and a dinner with potential partners from a major construction firm. Any one of these meetings could have resulted in deals worth millions of dollars. 2 days earlier, the thought of cancelling them would have been unthinkable. Now, sitting in his Tesla outside 2847 Maple Street, those meetings seemed distant and somehow less significant than the conversation that awaited him inside this modest house. The neighborhood had a sense of community that his wealthy enclave completely lacked. He could see people talking to each other across fence lines, children playing together in small groups, elderly residents sitting on porches despite the November chill. There was a warmth here that had nothing to do with expensive heating systems, and everything to do with human connection. Emma appeared at the front door before Marcus could gather the courage to knock, as if she had been watching for him through the window. She wore the same green jacket from that morning, but now she seemed more relaxed, as if having shared her mother's story had lifted a weight from her shoulders. "Mom's making coffee," she said simply, leading him inside without ceremony. The interior of the house was small but comfortable, filled with the kind of warmth that comes from love rather than expensive interior design. Family photos covered every available surface: school pictures with gap-toothed smiles, birthday parties with homemade decorations, graduation ceremonies where proud family members beamed at achievements that had required enormous sacrifice. The furniture was modest but well cared for, and the whole space had the lived-in feeling of a real home where a family had built their life together. Marcus was struck by how different this felt from his penthouse apartment with its designer furniture and spectacular views. This house was smaller than his living room, probably worth less than his car, but it radiated something his expensive spaces completely lacked. The sense that people belonged here, that this was a place where life was truly lived rather than simply maintained. Maria Rodriguez emerged from the small kitchen, and Marcus felt a powerful jolt of recognition. She was older now, her face lined with the kind of wear that comes from years of hard work and constant worry. But her eyes were exactly as he remembered them from that snowy night 8 years earlier. Intelligent, kind, and now filled with something that looked like relief mixed with apprehension. "Mr. Wellington," she said, extending her hand in a gesture that was both formal and genuinely warm. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure—" "Marcus, please," he replied, taking her hand. It was rough with calluses from years of cleaning and housework, a stark contrast to his own soft, manicured fingers that had never known physical labor. "Marcus," she repeated, as if testing how the name felt. "Can I get you some coffee?" "Emma, and told me you two had quite a conversation this morning." They settled in the small living room, Maria in an armchair that had clearly been repaired several times with careful patches and re-sewn seams, Marcus on a couch that was comfortable despite its obvious age. Emma disappeared upstairs, giving the adults privacy to talk, but not before Marcus caught her watching him with those perceptive eyes, still evaluating, still measuring him against some internal standard. "I owe you an enormous apology," Marcus began, his voice carrying a sincerity that surprised him. "I should have remembered you. What happened that night, helping you. It should have stayed with me." The fact that I forgot something so important says something about who I've become that I'm not proud of. Maria shook her head firmly. You have nothing to apologize for. You helped a stranger in crisis, and then you moved on with your life. That's normal, that's human. But for me, that night changed absolutely everything. Over the next hour, Maria filled in the details that Emma had only sketched that morning. She told him about the terror she had felt after the accident, facing the possibility of financial ruin over something that wasn't her fault. She described the relief when Marcus had made his phone calls, used his connections, vouched for her. Character to people who had the power to solve her problems. But more than fixing the immediate crisis, she said, leaning forward slightly. You treated me like I mattered. Do you have any idea how rare that is when you're poor? When you don't. Speak perfect English when you're just trying to survive day by day. Marcus felt a stab of shame as he thought about how many people he had dismissed or ignored in recent years, simply because they weren't useful to his business goals and weren't important to his success. The job with the Patterson family literally transformed our lives, Maria continued. Steady work with decent pay, health insurance, and respect from an employer who saw me as a person rather than just a pair of hands. Mrs. Patterson became like family to us. She helped Miguel get training as an electrician, and now he has his own small business. She wrote recommendation letters for Carmen when she was applying to colleges. Carmen's studying to be a teacher now and wants to work with kids from families like ours. And Emma? Maria's expression grew more serious, tinged with the worry that only a parent can understand. Emma is the smartest of my children, but she's also the one who inherited my stubborn independence. She's been having problems with her heart for months, but she didn't want to tell me because she knew I was already stressed about money and work. What kind of problems? She has a congenital heart defect that we didn't know about when she was born. It's been getting worse as she grows, making it harder for her to keep up with other kids her age. She gets tired easily and sometimes has trouble breathing. The doctors say she needs surgery to correct it. It's not immediately life-threatening, but it needs to be done soon. Marcus felt his chest tighten with anxiety on Emma's behalf. What does the surgery involve? It's a relatively routine procedure, but it's expensive. Even with insurance, we're looking at about $40,000 in out-of-pocket costs. I've been working extra hours, saving everything I can, but she spread her hands in a gesture of helplessness. I'll cover it. The words came out before Marcus had consciously decided to say them, emerging from some deep place that had nothing to do with calculation or strategic thinking. Maria's eyes widened in surprise. Marcus, I didn't tell you this story to ask for money. I wanted you to know the impact you'd had, to help you remember who you used to be. I know, Marcus said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. But I also know that 8 years ago, the person I was then would have offered to help without being asked. Maybe this is my chance to be that person again. They talked for another hour, with Emma eventually joining them, her presence somehow making the conversation easier and more natural. Marcus learned about their daily lives, the small struggles and victories, the ordinary moments that made up a real family's existence. Maria told him about her work with a local community center, helping other immigrant families navigate the systems and bureaucracies that had once seemed impossible to her. You taught me something important that night, she said, as Marcus prepared to leave. You showed me that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, and that when you receive help, you have a responsibility to pass it on to others who need it. As Marcus drove back to his penthouse that evening, his mind was spinning with possibilities that had nothing to do with profit margins or acquisition strategies. For the first time in years, he was thinking beyond quarterly earnings and market share. He was thinking about the community center Maria had mentioned, about families struggling with medical bills and insurance bureaucracy, about the ways his wealth and connections could make a genuine difference in people's lives. The next morning, Marcus called an emergency meeting with his company's board of directors. He arrived at the familiar conference room with Emma's original note in his jacket pocket, a tangible reminder of what really mattered beyond the pursuit of endless profit. "I want to establish a foundation," he announced to the surprised faces around the polished table. "The Wellington Family Foundation will focus on medical assistance for uninsured and underinsured families and support for small businesses in underserved communities." Thomas Henderson, still fixated on the lucrative deal they had been discussing earlier in the week, looked genuinely confused. "Marcus, this is very noble, but what about the South Side Development Project? We're talking about enormous profits." Marcus thought about the South Side, about communities like the one where Maria lived, where families worked multiple jobs and still struggled to make ends meet, where developers saw only profit potential in displacing long-established neighborhoods. "We're going to approach that development completely differently," he said, his voice carrying a new kind of authority. Not the power that came from wealth, but the confidence that came from having a clear sense of purpose. "Instead of displacing the existing community to maximize profits, we're going to invest in strengthening it. Affordable housing that people can actually afford, community centers, small business loans for local entrepreneurs, job training programs." The room erupted in protests about profit margins and return on investment, familiar concerns that had once seemed paramount to Marcus. But now he held up his hand in silence. "I've spent the last 8 years focused entirely on building wealth," he said, looking around the table at faces that reflected his own past priorities. "But this week, I remembered what it feels like to build something that actually matters to people's lives." 3 months later, Marcus stood in the waiting room of Chicago Children's Hospital while Emma underwent her heart surgery. The room was filled with the quiet tension that exists in all hospital waiting areas, where families sit with hope and fear in equal measure. Maria sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while Miguel and Carmen flanked her on the other side, the whole family united in their support for their youngest member. The surgery took 4 hours, each minute stretching like an eternity for the people who loved Emma. When the surgeon finally emerged, still in his scrubs, but wearing a smile that immediately eased everyone's fears, his first words were exactly what they needed to hear. "The surgery was completely successful. Emma did beautifully. Her heart is going to be just fine." When Emma woke up in recovery several hours later, still groggy from anesthesia, but alert enough to recognize the faces around her bed, her first words were characteristically direct. "Did it work?" "Perfectly," the surgeon assured her, checking her chart with obvious satisfaction. "Your heart is going to be stronger than it's ever been. You'll be able to do everything other kids your age do, run, play sports, anything you want." As Emma recovered over the following weeks, Marcus found himself visiting the Rodriguez family regularly. These weren't the obligatory visits of a wealthy benefactor checking on his investment, but something he had almost forgotten how to be: the visits of a genuine friend who cared about their daily lives and small victories. The Wellington Family Foundation officially launched 6 months later, with Maria Rodriguez as its first program director, a role that utilized her years of experience helping other families navigate complex systems while providing her with a salary that finally offered true financial security. The Foundation's mission statement, prominently displayed on letterhead and website alike, was elegantly simple. "We believe that every act of kindness has consequences we may never imagine, and that the true measure of success is not what we accumulate for ourselves, but what we give back to others. Sometimes the most unexpected moments hold the greatest potential for redemption. Marcus kept Emma's original note framed on his office wall, positioned right next to his business awards and recognition plaques. Visitors often asked about it, intrigued by the simple message written in purple crayon among all the formal certificates and polished trophies. When they did, Marcus would tell them the complete story of how a 10-year-old girl with a piece of paper had reminded him that the most important transactions in life aren't measured in dollars or calculated in quarterly reports. 1 year after their first meeting, Marcus and Emma stood in the exact spot where she had first approached him with her crumpled note. They were there for the groundbreaking ceremony of the new Wellington Community Medical Center, built in partnership with the existing clinic where Maria had nearly died years earlier. The new facility would provide expanded services, more specialists, and sliding scale fees that made healthcare accessible to working families throughout the neighborhood. The crowd gathered for the ceremony was unlike any Marcus had addressed in his previous life as a pure businessman. Instead of investors and developers focused solely on profit margins, he saw families from the neighborhood, community leaders, medical professionals who had chosen to work with underserved populations, and his own employees who had enthusiastically embraced the foundation's mission. "Do you think your mom knew what would happen when she sent you to find me?" Marcus asked Emma as they watched the construction crew prepare for the groundbreaking ceremony. Emma considered the question with her characteristic seriousness, the same thoughtful expression she had worn during their first conversation a year earlier. "I think she knew you were still the same person who helped her that night 8 years ago. You just needed to remember who that person was." As Marcus looked around at the gathering crowd, at Maria beaming with pride in her new role, at Miguel and Carmen home from their respective programs to celebrate this milestone, at the dozens of families who would benefit from the medical center, he realized that Emma was absolutely right. He hadn't become a fundamentally different person through wealth and success. He had simply lost touch with the values and instincts that had always been part of his character. Sometimes the most powerful transformations aren't about changing who we are, but about rediscovering who we were meant to be all along. And sometimes it takes a child with a piece of paper and 5 simple words to show us the way back home to our better selves. The story of Marcus Wellington and Emma Rodriguez became a reminder that our smallest acts of kindness can have consequences that echo through time in ways we never imagine, and that it's never too late to remember what truly matters. The end. Did "This Is How a Millionaire Stops" when a girl hands him a paper that says, "You saved my mom," move you? We'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let us know what part of the story touched you most. Also, where in the world are you watching from? It's incredible to see how far these stories travel, and we love connecting with our global community. Share your city, country, or even just your flag in the comments. Let's keep building something meaningful, one powerful story at a time. Subscribe to M&A The Story Unfolds for more emotional, unforgettable moments.